So we had a question in the chat box about who might be enforcing the regulations. And we have a code compliance team that currently does all of our enforcement of the land use code. So as it's currently set up, it would be under them. However, we are looking at, potentially we could have a position that's more dedicated to short-term rental licenses or vacation rental licenses, and could potentially do some of that enforcement as well. But right now, it's the code and compliance team that we have in place, which is about 2.5 people for the entire county. You can probably see the need for better enforcement mechanisms based on that.
So I can't tell what's going on because I can't see anything, but this is Dick Harris speaking. And is it okay for me to make a comment now?
Sure.
I've talked to a number of you over the months and actually years now about my concern about easements and getting to a rental property. And for the people who don't know about this already, the easement bisects my property. And so the short-term rental increases the traffic through my property. And that's the disadvantage to me. But I have just become aware today by asking somebody somewhere in county planning that there are standards for driveways to properties in the mountains. And the width of the road is not too serious a problem. It has to be 12 feet wide. It has to be graveled or some other form of solid. And then I think there has to be 2 feet on either side, making a total width of 16. The problem is that every 400 feet, you have to have a pullout. And our road accidentally has a couple, this is counting all the easements, has a couple of those, but not enough. And the Airbnb at the end of the road is 1.25 or so miles in from the highway. So, and it is in operation now. It was granted with a mistake, unfortunately, which presumably is now fixed. But the reason for the limitation on the road width and pullouts and so on is basically emergency vehicle access. So my road is basically that renter's road with easements is basically a safety hazard. And there's also some very steep parts of the road, and there are standards for that, either 12 or 16% grade, and I don't know any numbers about that. Now, what you've told me is that the county attorneys believe that the easement issue is something they don't want to get involved in. They want neighbors to struggle with each other over that, which might mean expensive lawsuits, I suppose. But it seems to me that this is a place where the approval should not be grandfathered, and the condition of the road not meeting county standards should be considered. I think that's all I need to say.
Okay, well, thank you for that. We are certainly concerned about the safety of the access and being able to get emergency vehicles to and from a short-term rental, especially. I'm not sure exactly which property you're talking about, but that would be something that we would take into consideration when they come in for any other land use approvals or a license, is that safety aspect.
But they will come in not for a license, but for a renewal. And you've already said that that's easy.
So they currently have an approval from us, and we overlooked this access issue.
Correct.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure how that will be addressed, but that's something that we definitely need to think about is if there was an approval made in error. Unfortunately, I think that we're going to be estopped, which is a legal term that basically says we made a mistake and granted someone something, so they get to keep it because it's our mistake. And that's true for a lot of things that happen in the county. Is if we accidentally miss something when issuing a building permit, for instance, we're not going to make someone rip it out just because we made that mistake.
And it doesn't matter if it's a matter of safety.
Well,
or fire.
safety concerns are still a priority, but I don't have an answer for you of what exactly we would do in this scenario.
Okay, it might be a fire truck or an ambulance. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we can be in touch about this as you find out more.
Yes, please keep in touch with us. We always welcome your emails. And we had some questions in the chat. Are these areas in Boulder County where people buy houses just to rent them short term? And yes, there certainly are many investment properties in the county where people have purchased a property with a residence for the sole purpose of renting them out on a short-term basis. That is something that does exist in the county. Another question in the chat is, are there county programs where the licensing fees cover all costs of enforcement? I don't think so. I think that for the most part, the licensing fees generally only cover a portion, and that would be true for this as well. I don't think there's any way that we could collect all of those fees to cover all of the staff time that's involved in these things. So some of that comes from the general fund to fund our department. And then there's also, you mentioned that you based the licensing fees on the $172 average nightly rental rate, and the question of why. And that is, we're trying to balance the income that people are getting with the costs of the enforcement. And it just made sense to say, okay, well, on average, people are getting this much per rental, and this is how long they're renting. So that's an income of X each year. So what percentage of that might be appropriate for us to charge as a fee for them to have that benefit if they check all the boxes?
Excuse me, those fees that you guys are discussing, and even some of their property, it's a write-off, right? Like Airbnb, that's a write-off. Any kind of license fees, that's a write-off with the IRS.
Yeah,
when they go file their taxes, that's all write-offs. So even though, yeah, they have to pay this, whatever, at the end of the day, when they file their tax, everything is written off with the IRS. I mean, and that's law. That's the tax law.
Yep. I think you have to itemize to do that, but yeah, certainly
you have to itemize because if you're paying sales tax, they have to, because if they're making, as long as if you rent more than 14 days, you have to. It's only if it's under 14 days, then actually that money you don't even have to claim it. But anything over 14 days, you have to you have to claim it. You have to do all yes.
And then we had another question in the chat about what's a long-term rental, and Molly answered that in the chat. Long-term rentals are defined as dwellings that are rented in durations of 30 days at a time or more. So if you're renting on a month-to-month basis or for 6 months or for a year, that's a long-term rental, not a short-term rental. We're only talking about the ones where you might rent out the place for a week at a time or for a weekend to other people, not those that are rented out for a month at a time or more. And then another question is, any consideration given to limiting the number of short-term rentals or to a percentage of the total properties within an area? We did originally ask people about that in some of our initial community engagement. and people didn't seem to like us limiting the number of licenses in a given area. That is something that we could still consider, but we've heard from the public that they don't want us to do that so far. And then how restrictive are these rules compared to other jurisdictions in Colorado and beyond? We deal with management costs that operate or properties all over the US, and the overwhelming view is that your regulations are an extreme outlier in terms of micromanagement. We actually consulted the City and County of Denver, the City of Longmont, the City of Boulder, and Nederland, and looked at codes for various Colorado and just Western states. We've looked at a lot of different codes, and we actually thought that ours struck a pretty good balance and tailored it to our needs. And this is what we've come up with so far. Again, it's a draft, nothing is final, and we welcome your input. If you have specific things that you think are too micromanagey, we can talk about that. We also looked at places like Grand County, Summit County, other large counties that have a lot of tourism. So we didn't just compare to the smaller cities or urban areas, but we did want to have something that was kind of more like just our general geographic area wasn't completely different than our neighbors. So we did look at the codes for similar counties as well. Donna, you have your hand raised?
Yes. One of my main concerns in this is that, this is a very desirable place to live, very desirable place to visit, and we already have a housing crunch, a housing shortage now. And one of the things you just said here is that they're not even going to restrict the number of these. So I did a little just calculation in my head, and if you rent out for like 30 days at $172 a night, that's about $5,000 a month. And what's to prevent? I mean, I know some of these you have to live in the house, but there's another one that you have where you don't have to live in the house. It's a second home that you're renting out, or it's a regular home. So how is this not going to prevent Boulder from just becoming a place where investors come in and I mean, tell me what I'm going to do, because my daughter's now in college, and if I can make lots of money on my house, it will no longer be a house that I want to live in. It'll just be a house for investment. I talked to somebody a while ago on another issue. He was a builder in the area, and he said, I don't build homes anymore. I build houses, mainly for investment purposes. Personally, I don't think that there should be any short-term rentals allowed. I think they should be long-term, or there should be vacation or a specific bed and breakfast that people, has a business for, a person in the mountains or something. But this is a time bomb getting ready to go off in a very highly desirable area that's very expensive.
Yeah, I certainly hear that concern. So the way that we are limiting the number of short-term rentals is by restricting how many that a person or entity can have. So if you have a license, you can't get another license for a different property. You can only have the one license, and that will prevent people from buying up multiple properties and renting all of them on a short-term basis, because they can only rent one of those on a short-term basis. Under our current code, you could actually do what you're talking about and buy up a bunch and rent them all. So we're trying to restrict that a little bit more than we currently do.
So somehow you can stop companies from building a bunch of houses and renting them all?
Well, there's very limited building in the county because of other reasons. So but yes, we would not allow a company to come in and build a bunch and rent them all under our draft regulations that we have now.
Okay, but if you're telling me or telling us that the commissioners do not want to have any kind of control or hire a company to enforce these codes that you are doing, what I don't understand, why are we even doing it? Because if you can't enforce it, you can't even enforce the code that was written previously. I just, it's hard for me to see how anything will change. I mean, you'll have the codes, but you're not going to be able to enforce them. And then anybody can get a license, and that's the other question, in the sense of if anybody now can go in and get a license, because we used to have, we were RR, so we were review, limited impact review. Now, apparently, they can just go in and get a license. And so, and we live in a HOA, and the home, I mean, it was voted, it was vetoed, right? But then we're not going to know about it, and they can just get a license. And then also the management company of our sanitation had written a letter regarding one of the impact reviews in November of 2019 saying that short-term rental is a bad idea for our septic system because it's already at the hilt. So I don't I don't see how anything will change, or maybe I'm being too critical. I mean, or not believing you guys, but I don't see how anything's going to change. You only have 2 people, as you said, to enforce it, and then your commissioners are saying no, forget it.
Well, so they haven't said no yet to us hiring an outside company to help us with that enforcement, but I think something that's really key here is, and I totally just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem. Sorry. I mean, I'm sorry I'm asking that, but it's like enforcement has been a big issue, right?
What I was going to say is the mechanism for enforcement being the licensing ordinance is really a game changer for us, because no longer do we have to go through, for the land use code, the state statute is like, you have to go through this like multi-month process. You might have to take someone to court before you could even bring action against them. So we have those zoning violation cases that drag on for multiple months, multiple years sometimes. The licensing ordinance is a game changer in that as soon as we identify a violation, we can impose a fine. So
yeah, but if they don't have a license, how do you impose a fine if they don't have a license?
Well, that's a good question. And I think that would have to go through our normal process as it's written right now.
I know, and that's why I'm saying nothing changes.
But I would like to definitely bring that up as something that we need to look more into in the draft code.
Well, because obviously you have 700. Honestly, how many of those that they're saying that exist, how many of those 700 actually have or obtained a license with you guys? How many?
Not that many.
Okay.
I think we're probably definitely less than half, but I'm not entirely sure how many we currently have. We've asked for that information from our GIS folks, but they haven't produced it quite yet.
Okay.
Alona,
but this is where the whole enforcement thing is. It's like it's sort of like, how are you going to get, if you have less than 50% of that 700, how are you going to get those other ones to comply if you don't have anything to, I mean, you're going back to the same thing as not even changing the code. I mean, I get it if you have a license, yeah, it's great. But if you don't, then nothing happens.
Yeah, I hear that concern, and definitely something we need to think about. Alona, do you have your hand raised? Hello?
Hello,
Ilona?
this
Here we
is
go.
Dick Harris
Okay,
Ah,
saying
okay.
something.
I had my microphone muted.
that's all right.
My question was more about the inspections that are going to take place. And I believe in the ordinance, it says that when the inspector comes to your potential short-term rental, the inspector can also inspect for violations of any other law or ordinance, which to me is hugely broad, and I'm not sure that's even legal, because isn't the inspector doesn't the inspector just have the authority to inspect for compliance with the short-term rental ordinance? You know, in other words, the inspector is not a law enforcement official, but are you giving him or her that authority to inspect for criminal violations and, you know, who knows what else?
No, no, their scope would be within our licensing ordinance and the land use code and the building code. So they would not be able to cite someone for a criminal violation or something like that. But I think that a distinction that should be made is between the vacation rental and the primary or secondary short-term rental.
Yes.
The vacation rental has to meet that much higher threshold of being completely in compliance with our codes, while the others, they just need to be safe, basically.
Okay. So will the inspector mostly be checking for safety issues, like do you have a banister on your stairway and things like that?
Yes, those are things that they would check for is, is there potential for someone to fall and hurt themselves in the home? Are there all of the carbon monoxide detectors and fire extinguishers and things like that?
Okay. You might want to write that then in your ordinance, because it is a little scary when you read that the inspector can inspect for for violations of any other law or ordinance when that's not even defined in the ordinance.
Yeah, we should clarify that that's limited to what our department has authority over.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm getting behind on the chat questions. Let's see. Molly, were there any in here that you haven't answered that would be good?
Yeah, so I tried to answer Bill's question. I wasn't really confident in my answer. He was asking if maybe some property owners in a town site could maybe limit the number of short-term rentals, and I had mentioned that there are some communities that are eligible to be rural community districts and can maybe have more stringent regulations, but I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think that that's a great answer, because we do have that opportunity for places like Allens Park and El Dorado Springs to come up with their own more restrictive zoning regulations, or through that rural community district that we have in our code. But I'd also like to mention, just kind of going off of that if you're in an area that has an HOA, the HOA can restrict short-term rentals through private covenants as well.
And Rainey, another question. Denise asked why we are looking to increase rentals from 45 days to 60 days.
So that wouldn't be necessarily an increase. The 45 days is a threshold that we have for the where if you're over that threshold right now under the current code, you have to go through a review process, and the threshold is either 14 days or 45 days. And if you're over that, depending on the zoning district, that's when you have to come to us for a review under our current code. So now with the 60 days, we're just saying that you fall into one category or the other, and that means you do one review or a different review depending on what your exact circumstances are. So we're not necessarily increasing it, but that's a threshold that's changing.
And regarding, everyone is now, even if you were rural residential with limit, but now anyone can just go in for a license, correct?
Yes, anyone can come
Without a
in.
limited review.
If you fall into one of the categories that doesn't require a review,
Yes,
so that would be
the first one, primary, yes.
the primary residence one, then yes, that's true. You only have to come in for a license, and then you have to meet all of the requirements in the licensing ordinance, which does still have some public notification. It still has a little bit of neighbor input, and then you have to, make sure that it's safe for both the neighborhood and the occupants, things like that.
So the HOA would be affected by that, and the sewer system, or, I mean, that's my major concern, is that if the HOA said no, and then the, whatever it is, SMI, whatever, management district says it's not a good idea, whatever, would you know that if they're just going in for a license?
If the HOA had restrictions, then that would be between the HOA and the private property owner on coming to some solution there. What was the second part of your question?
It's the management company for our sewer system.
So
had written Boulder County a letter, right, and said that it wasn't a good idea. It would put hardship, whatever. I don't know.
So
we're already really up there.
We are under the current draft. Anyone who's coming in for a license, they do have to be looked at by public health to make sure that whatever their waste disposal is going to meet the requirements and the needs of that use.
Okay, but that's still not, that's not an answer. Because obviously we have it, it's just they're not recommending the overusage.
So we could have a referral component where we refer out to that type of agency that would, and then they could voice their concerns about if there was a short-term rental and had a big party in there causing problems with the waste disposal. So we could have a referral component, and I think there might actually, I remember writing something about that in the licensing ordinance, but I don't know, I can't remember if we took it out or left it in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, it's just, I'm concerned because if this happens, we can't expand, meaning we'd have to get a whole new system, and it's a lot of money. And we already pay without the mill levy, I mean, because we also have the mill, you know what I mean, we're paying with the taxes and our private. Privately, we pay $820 to flush the toilet, okay? And then basically with the taxes and property taxes, whatever, it's $90 a month. And there's already over, what is it, 1.7 million or something like that in debt. And so basically if something happens, we're going to be paying a lot more money. And I'm sorry, but it could cost my property value to go down, and plus it'll cost us a lot of money. You know what I mean? Because you have to pay so much, you know. So and that was brought to my attention, and that's my concern. Okay, is how does this? Because I see that it's public health. But we already have a sewer system. But, I mean, do you take into consideration when someone is saying, hey, you know, you're on the edge?
Mm-hmm. And so I would say that under the primary accessory short-term rental, as it's currently written, that might not be something that we would catch. However, that is definitely something that gets looked at through the limited impact special review and the special review processes. We specifically
but we wouldn't be under that though, right?
So if you're under the primary accessory short-term rental, then
right.
Really what that means to us is that residence is going to be used in a way that is really aligned with how it's used by a single family in the first place. I understand that guests are kind of different than a family living there, but that's someone's home where they care about it, they're maintaining it, they live there most of the year, and they're just, maybe renting it out on their 2 weeks of vacation each year. And so that's not that different from the use as a whole as a single family dwelling. And so that's why we're allowing those uses, that particular use by right without further review. But under the other two categories, we specifically look at an increase in services or facilities and what that might mean for that neighborhood.
Right, but the problem is that the houses in this neighborhood are huge. Okay, so they don't follow your rules. Well, first of all, none of them have applied for a license, and they've been doing this, and they have parties, and they have, 12 or more people sleeping in the homes. So, I get, but
they're definitely restricted to 8 under this, unless they can.
I get that, but nobody is right. But nobody's enforcing. No one cares. I hate to say that, but people are doing whatever they're doing, right? And I guess, and that's the problem with all of this. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people are concerned and unhappy, because people are just doing whatever they want to do. And,
Yeah. Well, we definitely hear that concern, and that's something for us to think about these by right, the primary accessory being by right, and how we might need to address that otherwise. So going back to the chat, and Molly, were there any other questions in the chat that popped up?
Yeah, Rainey, there's a couple. So Denise had also asked about how basically she thinks regulations should be stricter for bed and breakfast, since the only difference is really them serving one meal. She said this means they can put out a bowl of fruit and call it a meal. So a short-term rental could essentially be a bed and breakfast.
So the main difference between those, between all of the short-term rentals and the bed and breakfast use, is the bed and breakfast, that owner or manager has to be on site for all of the rentals. So like they have to live there year round, and they have to be there when they have guests on site. So there's that management component where there is 100% oversight of the guests. That's the reason that the bed and breakfast might seem like it's not as restricted, but you have to meet that threshold to be able to get it.
And then Heather asked, given the minimal impact of short-term rentals on 5+ acre lots in rural areas and other remote cabins, is there any thought to removing the public hearing process for such properties? It seems like there could be less restrictive rules for truly remote properties.
I think that we have other safety concerns with those more remote properties, that's the reason why we're keeping them in a public hearing category, because when you have a more remote property, then emergency access and wildfire risk, those things come into play more so than if you're in a dense neighborhood.
And then it looks like the last one was from Margaret. Why is there no limit on the number of nights for a B&B? No permit needed. Did I understand you correctly? This is a major concern, especially because you only have 2 people to enforce the proposed regulations. Essentially, anyone could operate a flop house and call it B&B. Again, the septic systems in the foothills are not equipped to handle this, nor can the well system support it. This must be addressed.
So again, I'll go back to that management component of the bed and breakfast being a major benefit to how they get limited in the impacts that they produce. And I also wanted to point out that currently under our code, a bed and breakfast would be allowed to operate with, one of these reviews if they got approved for it. but yeah, we definitely hear that concern, and we'll take that into consideration as we're moving forward, Margaret. I will also say that bed and breakfasts in Boulder County are pretty rare. I think we only have a handful of them at this moment. I can only remember one ever even coming through a review process.
I have a question, if you could just clarify for me.
Sure.
So my parents have a primary residence, and I can't really quote the acreage exactly, but they have about 5 acres with their primary residence. They have an additional 8 or so acres on an adjacent piece of land with a small cabin. Can they or can they not, since it's 2 different parcels, 2 different houses, one's primary, one's, I guess, is vacation rental, can they operate both properties for vacation rental purposes?
If it's 2 different properties, then they can only have 1 license per property. So, and only 1 license per person. So I would say that under the draft regulations that we have now, they would only be able to operate 1 of those if they're on different properties.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned that you looked at a number of other short-term rental regulations from the city of Denver to, I don't know, I forget the other ones that you mentioned, but it seemed most of the people on the call today, if I recall correctly, were from the mountains. And you said you looked at Netherlands.
You cut out there, and
somehow I muted myself. You
okay.
mentioned that you looked at the Netherlands regulations, which is arguably it is the mountains. Did you look at Larimer County and what other mountain communities that are similar to the mountains of Boulder County, which seem to have, at least what I've seen, is interspersed cabins here and there. There's no like town like Crested Butte or anything where you have a lot of short-term rentals, compacted into a small area of a little town. Most of the maybe in Netherlands, but Netherlands.
We can call Chrisman a town.
I'm sorry, which town?
I say that too loud.
Okay. Well, I'm just wondering what other ordinances or regulations you looked at from what specific counties.
Yeah, I'm actually going to pull up our research spreadsheet and let you know.
Great.
So, first one that showed up was Larimer County.
Oh, really? Okay.
We also looked at Jefferson County, Summit County, Grand County. Looked at Austin, Texas. Leadville was also on here. But if you're interested in Larimer County, let's see.
I have those. I've looked at them. I think they're really reasonable.
Okay.
I mean, in all fairness, I understand all the hard work and I appreciate all the hard work that you put into it. But to me, some of the provisions are really a solution looking for a problem. I mean, and I think a lot of them are good, but until that specific problem arises, then maybe you could implement a regulation on that. I think most people are doing pretty well, from my experience, with their mountain short-term rentals. That's my experience. So I guess I'm kind of urging you in as gentle way as I can to not be overly zealous and overly, overbroad and overreaching with these regulations. Maybe start out a little more gentler and see how things work out. For example, the 2-night minimum on the primary, secondary accessory short-term rental. I get it that you want to limit the impacts of the short-term rentals. I'm not opposed to the 2-night minimum. I think most people would rather have have, rent for 2 or 3 nights, so you're not cleaning as much. But there's other things in here that I think you might just hold back a little bit before you implement them. And one of my concerns, quite frankly, is the 60 days. And I know I've heard people in this forum say they don't like short-term rentals, they don't want short-term rentals, they really want to limit them. But 60 days is 2 months, right? And if you're renting in the mountains, it's the summer, and the summer is 3 months. So I'm wondering if you might think about maybe extending that to 75 days, or if you could create some criteria where certain properties could get a waiver from that 60 days. And I'm not talking, to 180 days. Maybe, you could rent it for 75 days or 90 days or something like that, if you meet certain criteria that would be in addition to the general criteria that you have now.
Okay.
Instead of just having a drop dead 60 days, you're this, 61 days, all of a sudden you're a vacation rental and you're paying an $800 license fee.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that feedback, and good to know that about Larimer County, that you think that their regulations are really reasonable. So we might look at those again, and we'll definitely think about what you've said.
Yeah, they have the same occupancy limits, and they have the requirement where you have to post your license on any advertisements, things like that. So, thank you.
Yes. Donna?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, so I still want to go back to part of my original statement there is, I know, I believe the city of Boulder, when they were looking at co-ops, they limit the numbers that could be in a particular neighborhood or a particular community. Why, I still don't understand why that's not a factor here, because like I said, I think these could just snowball. And why in your regulations do you not have some way of limiting how many of these are in one area? I mean, some towns in the mountains could just become all short-term rentals. So how are you limiting these? And like I said, there's a huge incentive, huge money incentive to make a lot of money doing this. So I'm just wondering whether there's something that can be in the regulations to limit the amount of these that are going in.
Yeah, so one of the reasons that we decided not to move forward, well, besides just hearing that the public didn't like it, was that we decided to not move forward with limiting the number of licenses within a geographic area is because of fairness. We heard a lot of people complain about, well, what if you're only allowing 2 per this area, and 2 people have already taken those licenses, so what am I supposed to do? So it's kind of like a first come, first serve sort of imbalance in that fairness. But then we also have things to consider, like Allen's Park, where it's historically been a tourism destination with seasonal cabins and family cabins that have been there for 100 years, and they're only used in the summer. And it's really for the short-term kind of living situations and rental situations. So we do have areas like Allen's Park to consider as well. Margaret?
Yes, if I could jump in for a second, I'd like to echo what Donna just said. I don't see where you have any restriction or means of regulating how many people could be renting in any fashion, either with a short-term rental agreement of some sort, or just calling it a B&B, and you have people in and out, and it's constant traffic and noise and dust, and it is a complete nuisance already with people who don't know how to drive on mountain roads. And I'm only talking about less than 4 miles up 4 Mile Canyon. I'm not talking about Netterland or Allen's Park or Larimer County. I'm talking about very close to downtown Boulder, and it is obnoxious already. And it's only going to get worse with these unenforceable, what you call restrictions or regulations. If you can't control it, then it isn't even a regulation. It's a suggestion, and that's not enforceable.
Yeah, we definitely hear you on that point. So I think your main question was how are we, or why are we not limiting the number more, and how are we limiting the number? And currently, the way that it's written is you can only have one license per person, and so one person or entity cannot go out and buy multiple properties and make them all short-term rentals. They would only be able to make one a short-term rental. So that's that, and the restriction on the property size, and the restriction that the vacation rentals can't be in platted subdivisions is meant to get at some of those issues.
If you're in the foothills, you're not in a subdivision. There's an old mining town called Chrisman that's been there for 100 years. I've only been there for a quarter of a century, a little over that. But that is not a subdivision, so you can't use that terminology. It's not like being in a town, but it is certainly a mountain community. And this wrecks the whole ambiance and the whole reason that you live in the foothills in a secluded area. It's no longer secluded, it's constant traffic with people who don't know how to drive steep mountain roads. And they don't know that a level 2 fire restriction means you have to sit in your vehicle to smoke your cigarette. You can't stand out in the open, and you can't throw your cigarette down. It only takes one person not obeying that law, and we all lose our homes. Mm-hmm. We lost 169 of our neighbors' homes, and I don't want it to happen again.
So just to clarify, we do have subdivisions in our mountains, places like Barkay, Santa's Acres, St. Anton Highlands. Those are all subdivisions, not town sites and not urban areas, surely, but they are what we call subdivisions and platted areas. But I think that some of our other licensing requirements are what we're trying to get at, that safety thing, that they're going to have wildfire information posted in the home, and it'll be a handout that we produce, and then they have to post it, and that'll also require them to tell their guests of any fire restrictions that are happening currently and things like that, to try to get at some of that safety stuff.
You can't get people to read. You can't get them to pay attention. They won't keep their dogs on a leash. I mean, there are 100 reasons why this is a bad idea. I know you're trying to regulate it. You're trying to do the right thing, and I applaud you for your efforts. But it needs to have some teeth, and it needs to have full-time people to enforce it. And 2 people for a whole county will not begin to cover it. I'm sorry.
Thank you for your feedback. That we're glad to have it, and we certainly hear your concerns, and we're taking everything into consideration. Donna, and then after Donna, if there's maybe 1 or 2 more questions, we'll go through that. But it's getting a little bit late, so Donna, what else do you have for us?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I just noticed that you had said, to limit them, they were doing it by, only, you can only have, an owner can only have like 1 house that they rent out. They can't have like 2 or 3, right?
Yes.
So how do you do this ownership thing? Because, some companies, they just go under a different name, such and such LLC, Mountain View LLC, Boulder LLC or whatever, they'll have a different, so can LLCs rent these out, or only individuals that are, a person that would live in that house?
Okay, so the license required, section 2 says that only 1 license of any type may be issued to each person and any legal entities associated with that person, including trusts, corporations, estates, or associations. So we do incorporate all of those different scenarios into that in the code, in the licensing ordinance, I mean.
Oh, that sounds good. Okay, thanks.
All right, any last questions before we all sign off?
Rainey, I think there was just one quick question from Heather. She asked, how many changes are currently planned between the final and draft regulations? Any differences that you can share?
Well, we don't know exactly what changes might come about quite yet. The referral period doesn't end until September 30th, so we haven't even heard from all of our referral agencies yet, and they might have some things that they want us to address through these new changes. I think that we're definitely going to look more into these enforcement mechanisms and try to really address that part where we have all of these rentals out there that aren't coming in for their proper licensing or process, and how are we going to get them to do that if they're just not willing to cooperate. So whether that means hiring a consultant to do it or some other mechanism that we come up with in the code or the licensing ordinance, I think that is probably the major thing that we're going to try to just nail down a little bit better in the code before it's finalized for Planning Commission. But other than that one, I'm not sure what other changes we might be thinking of at the moment.
I just have a quick question. You said the next step is to go in front of the Planning Commission?
Correct.
And is that a public hearing, or is that a work session, or what is that meeting with the Planning Commission?
That is a public hearing that you are
okay.
welcome to join, and it will be
Okay.
held virtually. So just like this, you can come and tell them what you think about it.
Okay, and that's October 21st?
Let me verify that. I'm pretty sure that's the correct date.
Okay.
Yes, October
Okay.
21st is when the Planning Commission hearing is that we are on track to go to with this update.
And you will give them proposed regulations, not a draft, right?
Yes, we will have the proposed regulations that we are recommending to the Planning Commission, and then they will let us know what they think about them, and then they also give a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. So we recommend to the Planning Commission, and then staff plus the Planning Commission recommend to the Board of County Commissioners.
And will the regulations that you propose to the Planning Commission be available to the public before the meeting?
Yes, at least 1 week prior.
1 week prior, okay. And you'll send out an email to everyone?
I'm sure we will,
Okay.
and they will definitely be posted on the website 1 week
Okay.
prior.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And Rainey, it looks like, I don't know how much time we have, but looks like Denise wanted to say something quick before we end.
Okay, go ahead. And I think this will be the last one. We were hoping to wrap up around 8:15, but 8:30 is fine with me.
So thanks for putting this on again. I attended your last one and felt it was very informative. And I will likely be at the Planning Commission on October 21st. So what I want to ask is, and this is going back as a biosafety professional dealing with a pandemic on a daily basis, is any of that playing into the code, the regs that you've been proposing? I mean, I live up here off of 4 Mile, and I try to be very responsible for my coworkers and loved ones. And the last thing I want is, people coming in here on a daily basis, and typically they're coming in from out of state, which is even worse, right? And I'm sure I'm not, that the Airbnb being run across the street for me is part and parcel to all the other Airbnbs with people just coming in from everywhere. So what if any considerations have been given to the pandemic? Because I can tell you as a professional, what we see today, hear me when I tell you, this is as good as it's going to get for the next 12 months. And it can get worse. But this is as good as it's going to get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point to bring up. I would say that we have not really thought about the pandemic as far as this draft code goes, but that is because this draft code is going to outlive the pandemic. I mean, hopefully, I really hope it's not around for another 20 years, but the code has to live as part of our code for a much longer time than we anticipate the pandemic to last. And in the meantime, any public health restrictions that the county or state has would apply to these short-term rentals, just as it does to hotels and other places. So I think that it's a really great point that you bring up, and something that we should think about just in the short term, the next year or so. Very big concern for all of us, but these regulations last a lot longer. So
I think it would be important, to at least have that language in the code to say, everything contained within this code will also be subject to any provisions from CDPHE and at the state, local, even Boulder County Public Health. I think there needs to be language in there. I mean, this is our new normal. The pandemic may wane, but this virus is with us. It is not going away. We're not going to just wish it away, or even with hurting. I mean, it will be, it's now part of the lexicon. This particular virus, it's here.
yeah, thank you for that suggestion, and we will definitely consider putting that in there, or just kind of a blanket statement of you have to follow the public health ordinances and the public health notices that are currently out there for this type of lodging use or transient lodging. So thank you for that. We'll definitely consider what that means for
I
now
appreciate
and for
that.
future.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending tonight. This has been really useful for us, and I hope that you all got something out of it too. Please keep in touch with us via email or give us a phone call. And definitely, if you have something that you want to be considered by the boards, send us comments, written comments, please, because we don't want to speak and put words in your mouth. But we want to be able to communicate your concerns and your ideas and your words to those boards. But we really appreciate everyone coming out tonight. So thank you, and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you for doing all of this and taking your time to do all of this.
You're very welcome. Bye, everyone.
Good
night.
So just quickly, the chat comments don't count. We've got to put in formal comments.
Oh, no, any comments that we receive that are in writing, those are going to be included.
So these chat comments from the first part of the meeting and this one go in?
The chat comments, and then we recorded the meeting so that we have a record of it as well. So that'll all be included in our analysis. But if you have specific feedback, then I would encourage you to put it in writing so that we can pass that along more easily. It's not very easy to attach a recording of a meeting to a staff recommendation.
Yep, understood. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.